Hello! Today I want to do the first of what will be a weekly series of meta reports for Lorcana, where I'll take a look at the results of recent tournaments and the meta analysis for Pixelborn. I'm using this subreddit for my reference. I'll be posting any reports that I find and taking the data from the Pixelborn Discord. Really quick, thank you, Pavel, for sharing this data, and thank you, Gigabyte, for making it into a readable infographic. We did have a decent paper tournament with PPG's Lorcana 1K, and you can see the top 8 results on their website. There were 56 players, and the top 8 split. One of the top players commented that there were many mistakes from players net decking and not knowing how to play their decks. I'm not putting too much weight on paper tournaments because of accessibility to product, and the sample size is pretty small, but the decks here are still solid. The data I'm going to look at the most is from Pixelborn. This is going to be the most heavily weighted data we can look at because we're looking at data reports for over 5,000 games played. This report specifically shows results from games where at least one player was in the top 100 of the leaderboard. So it filters out some of the inexperience of new players and gives us a great look at matchup win rates. I'm going to over-explain a little bit for anyone who's familiar with this data, but Gigabyte does a great job making this infographic very readable. We can see how many games were played in this data and the total games played by each deck. And if we look at the pie chart, it's broken into percentages, so we can see that 29.4% of games included an Amber Steel deck, 23.8% of games included a Ruby Amethyst deck, and so on. And you can also see the win rates for those decks underneath. The best thing this pie chart reveals is how diverse the meta is. While we do have 2 decks with an over 50% representation, we still see the top 5 having a close win rate versus each other. And there's a deeper data dive on this. We can see the breakdown of each color's wins and losses, and then if we scroll down, we can see the top 15 most played decks and their win rates. And very importantly, in this bottom right section, we can see each deck's win rates against the top 5 decks. If I want to climb ladder, I'm looking at which decks have a high win rate versus the top 2 here, because those will represent over 50% of your games. And you want to play a deck that has at least a high win rate against one of them. And now looking at that, we have Amber Steel in first place, followed by Amethyst Ruby, Amber Sapphire, Amber Emerald, and then Sapphire Steel, rounding up the top 5. Any of these top 5 decks are going to be good to look at if you're wanting to play on Pixelborn, or if you're looking at what deck you want to build in paper. I do expect Amethyst Ruby to have a higher representation in paper tournaments, just because climbing ladder with the control deck is pretty miserable. But there's still a ton of people doing it, and I don't expect that representation to go away. I want to point out Sapphire Steel has had a higher win rate versus those top 2 decks, and it's not just this week, it's been pretty consistent. But from my personal experience, I'll tell you it's a difficult deck to pilot, but the data shows it's very favorable going into this meta. Another standout is Amethyst Sapphire, showing high win rate against the top 3 decks, but I haven't been able to personally find a deck list from one of the top performing players to see exactly what kind of deck they're playing. But I do want to show you how to find that information. So if we come over back to the Lorcana meta subreddit, we have a pinned thread, top Dreamborn profiles, and here I'll try to keep up with top performing players' Dreamborn profiles to see what decks they're playing, as well as any notable deck builders like Tandy, who is a very experienced TCG player, and Antanjo, who posts winning deck lists a lot. So if I'm looking for a deck list, I'm going to go through this list here and see what they're building, but nobody has a list for Amethyst Sapphire, so we'll have to dig a little deeper by going to dreamborn.inc and checking out decks. At the top you can filter into Amethyst Sapphire, and now the hard part is digging through to find out if any of these lists are coming from top players. But right away here we have first place at the Atlanta 1K, so I'll click on that. And now we've got a list to look at. Notably, I wanted to find out if this was a ramp deck or a mid-range deck, and the key differences there are going to be if the deck includes Bell, Strange But Special, and One Jump Ahead or not. This deck excludes those ramp effects, but does have the Mickey Mouse Wayward Sorcerer Broom control package, and it has the mid-range tells like Maleficent, Uninvited, and Robin Hood. Now I don't know if this is the same one that's doing well on Pixelborn Ladder, but it did get first place at a paper tournament, so it's a safe place to start. I'll add Triumph's profile to the list to reference because he's posting a lot of top 8 deck lists. One thing this data doesn't show is whether or not a deck is mid-range or aggro or control. So when we look at the data for Amber Steel, it includes any Stitch Miracle variants and the mid-range variants lumped together. So we have to do a bit of digging and looking at top player lists to find what's really working. Even though I found a list for Amethyst Sapphire mid-range, the data showing its high win rate could include Amethyst Sapphire ramp decks. The same can be said for the Sapphire Steel data as well. So I'll be keeping this list updated to get a better idea of what's working and what isn't. I'll be keeping these videos shorter, but they will be my reference as I consider what competitive content I want to make throughout the week. Thank you so much for watching. Quick reminder, I have a trove to give away. After reaching 50 followers on Twitch, you can help us get there by following me and also be entered in the giveaway by subscribing to the channel and commenting down below. Tell me what deck you're playing or what deck you wish you were playing. That's all. Thanks again.